thing and things like that. So just remember that. We're coming up in 5, 4. Hey, 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 everybody. Hey, hey, hey. Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. How you doing? How you doing? How you doing? Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Got a lot to talk about today. Every day brings you something new. How do you pick a story? The thing is, you can't. There is a through line with all of the stories. I came across a study that shows that 7 billion inhabitants of our earth do not have their civil rights. At least. And that's really not surprising when you look at the state of the world. And in the United States, we are fighting for our civil and human rights. And let's talk about that. How do we fight back? Well, the Rainbow Push Coalition, we are having our international conference on the 12th, 13th, and 14th. And we're going to be talking about just that. And on the 14th, indeed, I'm going to have Alex Lawson from Social Security Works back on the show to talk about the No Kings movement. Because, of course, there will be the military parade on the 14th, falling on, coincidentally, the president's birthday. But it's a military parade, and it's sending some very disturbing signals about the concentration of power in the United States. And we need to talk about that. This is not a partisan issue, everybody. You got to get out of your partisan silos, because Palantir is now all over our government. Who are they? They have been collecting all of our intelligence data. Mm-hmm. That ought to concern people, all Americans. I don't care how you vote. And there are people on the right who come at it from their own philosophical space, and people on the left who come at it from our own philosophical space. Whatever it is, I think that there's a common good that Americans need to really begin to reach for. There's some things that should be forbidden in our society. There's some things that we need to affirm. We need to stop saying who we are not. This is not who we are. I keep hearing these pundits say that. No, this is who we are. This is who we've been. We were founded on stolen land as a colony. We fought colonialism, but we became the colonizers. We enslaved people. We denied women our full rights. And you can keep on going on and on and on and on. This is not new to the human or the American experience, but where do we go from here? Dr. King said it, chaos or community. We're watching our voting rights being taken away, our civil rights. You have the Pentagon saying no to DEI and affirmative action, although the Supreme Court said yes to affirmative action. For the military, for no place else. But if you will go and fight our wars, risk your life, we're not going to put any parameters on your coming into the military. We're not going to put any parameters on Black people heading up AFRICOM. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, you can go in and do that and try to wreak havoc on the Sahel, Burkina Faso, and Niger and Mali as they seek to be free of their colonizer, which is France. And the Western world, we've got to really, in all of these issues, when you think about it, they are connected. They're interconnected. DEI, affirmative action, taking SNAP and WIC and Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid from everybody. They're called entitlement for working people and poor people, but it's called saving America when you give a bailout to a billionaire or a trillionaire. Think about it. In 2008, Goldman Sachs went to our Speaker of the House and said, if you do not give me $700+ billion today, we are going to bankrupt your economy. We're going to tank your economy on Monday. This was on a Friday. Remember that? They told her that. And Americans went crazy. We said, wait a minute, how are we going to be held up by one investment bank? This is where we are, everybody. This is where we are. Now we're seeing 2,000 National Guards persons deployed on the streets of Los Angeles. These people have been pushing back against human beings being put in concentration camps, because that's what the ICE detention centers are.
Mm-hmm.
They are. No one deserves that. If they're not here legally, then you know what? You can remove them respectfully. But you don't have to dehumanize them. You don't have to separate mothers from their children when they have them in a hospital. You don't need to do that. And we're not going to be blessed for that. But we have not had that kind of the militarization of our National Guard since Rodney King. But quite frankly, it actually goes back to LBJ. Because when they nationalized the National Guard, when they federalized the National Guard in 1992, the governor asked the president to do so.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't done this since LBJ sent the troops into Alabama in 1965, when the president unilaterally went over a governor and sent basically the troops in. And I'm going to tell you, Dr. Alia Amar, social justice advocate, Attorney Darrell Jones, chairman of the Transformative Justice Coalition, Haitian American Lawyers Association, President Anastasie Sanat, Attorney Anastasie Sanat. I was in Los Angeles in 92 when they were on lockdown. I'd flown in from Japan. I was singing background for Roberta Flack at the time. And part of the challenge we had was trying to figure out how to get back into the United States. So, because they had shut so much of the country down, because as you recall, in 92, the country was up in flames. So, okay, we got back into Los Angeles because she was doing the Arsenio Hall show. We all were. I was part of her band. It was exciting. Fortunately for me, my father was coming in the next day. Well, actually, he was going to be in LA because they needed him to help quell the riots and help to get the peace. And so we went around with him because he had a police escort and all of that. And I can tell you something that moved me to tears. And I was surprised, Dr. Amar and Attorney Jones and Attorney Sanat, by my reaction. We were at KJLH radio station, Stevie Wonder's radio station, which is in the heart of Black LA. And we were on Crenshaw Boulevard. And it was dusk. And believe me, when there is a curfew, they mean it. You know this as a former prosecutor, Darrell Jones. They mean it. And if you step out, you could get shot. I didn't really understand it until I saw the tanks rolling down the street. Didn't really understand it until I saw the armed soldiers outside of my hotel in Beverly Hills. Up and down the street, that is where they were throughout the day, but at dusk, they were out in force. Is that the kind of country we want? Think about that. We have to look at the time to fight. That's why we are gathering in Chicago on June 3rd, 13th, 12th, 13th, and 14th, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Everybody, I encourage you, and I was so glad to see so many of you from my AM 950 radio family there last year. And we're going to have another great time, another great gathering. We're going to actually have a protest at a Target store with Pastor Jamal Bryant. We're going to have Reverend Dr. William Barber, he's coming in. John Nichols from the Nation magazine is coming in. Dr. James Zogby is coming in. Attorney Darrell Jones is coming in. And we're going to bring on Attorney Anastasie Sanat. You're going to take a break from your practice, Dr. Amar. A lot of people are coming in of all backgrounds because we know that we have an emergency. And we know that we need to fight back and fight for the kind of country and world that we want and need. So let me just start here, because there's so much evidence that our civil and human rights are they're not being eroded, they're just being taken from us. So, when you take right away, it's hard to get them back. Let me start with you, since, ladies, we're going to be nice to the only guy on our panel today. Attorney Darrell Jones. I mean, it's not in our imaginations that we're losing these rights, or that we're not losing them, they're being taken from us, Attorney Jones.
You're absolutely right. The rights are being taken, and some
circumstances, you begin to question about the fighting back, and how does the community, how do we as citizens respond when our rights are being challenged and when our rights are being taken from us. One thing that we have often looked to, we look to the courts to protect those rights. One thing that we've been watching, particularly when it comes to immigration issues, is that the courts don't appear to be protecting those rights. That the Supreme Court in particular seems to be taking the knee to the administration rather than standing up to the administration. And where does that leave us as citizens? Well, where it leaves us as citizens is in the posture of having the No Kings type of demonstration, of having the demonstrations that you see that are occurring up, the organic demonstrations that are occurring all across the country, particularly now in Los Angeles with the immigration question. Now, what you see there is a response to ICE doing these raids in these communities. And Santita, and perhaps it's because I'm just coming from church and everything that I'm on my spiritual high. But I can't imagine that we as Christians, those of us that are Christian, begin to think about boundaries that God would have in place that we couldn't cross, that we need certain permission to cross land. And so there are a lot of problems that are within that. And I think that what we see happening in the United States right now on the immigration front is that we see people that are becoming aligned with their morals and saying that, while we may have laws talking about when people can migrate and come in legally, we equally must have laws that talk about due process, that talk about respecting individuals' rights. And that's what we're seeing being taken away in mass numbers across this country right now, is the due process right. When we talk about...
First, what is due process? I mean, we hear these terms. I don't think we really have a working definition of them. What is that?
Right. When we say due process, DUE, when we say due process, what we're talking about is the process that is due to people to be able to have a hearing, to be able to have a setting where a judge makes a determination as to whether or not what is being sought by the government is correct or not. That's due process. It's not saying that the fingers aren't on the scale, it's not weighed one way or the other way, but rather there should be an opportunity to be heard. That's what we call due process, is the opportunity to be heard. What we see happening in the cases dealing with the immigration rights, people are not having the opportunity to be heard. Particularly when they were sending them to El Salvador, now they're talking about sending them to South Sudan and all these other places in the country. There are no hearings. There are no determinations as to whether or not the United States and the U.S. Department of Justice is correct in their assessments. And in essence, we're making the president, the finder of fact, the jury, the judge, all of it. They make that determination. They'll send someone away from the country before there's any type of process that's put in place to review the information to see if it's accurate. That's why I think you're seeing a lot of this pushback across the country with regards to what's happening. Is that the right now the court system from the Trump administration isn't even being considered because they don't have to go to the court system because they're sending the people away. What most Americans, and I would say most Americans, are saying with regards to immigration is, let's go through the process. Let's give everyone the opportunity to be heard. That way, if you're right, government, in what you're saying, the judge or appellate judge or whatever will go ahead and affirm what you've said. We've developed a record. We've been able to look at the facts. We've applied the law, and this is the conclusion. What's happening right now is all that's being streamlined. They're saying, no, administration, do what you want to do in these immigration cases. And that's why you have ICE going in, grabbing people, some U.S. citizens, right? Some children, and detaining them for extended period of times to prepare them for deportation to countries that they may not have any connection to. People that end up in South Sudan, people that end up in El Salvador, maybe from Venezuela, maybe from any other country that's there. So they have, nothing that's in place.
Or they could be from Compton.
They could be from Compton.
Because
Absolutely.
they grab you based upon what you look like. And still, When you bring Ukrainians to Chicago, by the tens of thousands, no one says a word. When you bring South Africans, really under specious, what look under a lie. Let me not candy coat this. They are not being genocided. They do not need to seek asylum. There's nothing wrong with them other than they can't steal everyone's land anymore. But they're being brought here as if they are an aggrieved people who need shelter. And you can't get asylum until you're in the country anyway. So I mean, because it's like we've completely abused that, Attorney Jones. You see, I mean, that's why the Olympics have always been such a big deal. Because once you got your foot in the country, then you could seek asylum. You don't go bring people over here and say, okay, they've got asylum. What is that about? That's not the way that works. I know Anastasia Sinai is the
You know, I
expert.
have a couple of things. Good
Well,
afternoon, everybody.
good afternoon.
I wanted to push back first on the ideal that the ICE detention centers are equivalent to concentration camps. First of all, Hitler put those individuals in those places specifically to kill. So I don't want anyone to go out and say these things or repeat these things
Oh
because
no,
ICE
no. You know
detention
why I
centers
do?
are not concentration
No,
camps.
no, 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 no. They shouldn't be. But when people talk about the conditions under which they have to live in those places, they are equivalent to concentration camps. And a
And,
concentration
and
camp,
those are just
Hitler.
people who had never been there.
No,
As
no, no,
a
no,
former
no,
ICE
no, no,
attorney
no, no. I,
who
I
had
know
worked
people. I
many
know.
detention facilities,
I know
I
people
do
who've been
know
there.
how those
I
individuals are treated in those private
no,
prisons.
no. I know who people. I know people who visited there. And these are human rights advocates who said that these places are an abomination. And you've got tens of thousands of missing children, Anastasia.
There's always someone that's going to say that things are bad, but the truth is that they're
No,
not.
that is the truth. Now
They're
you and
not any
we can
worse than having
you
people, which really
you
are.
and I
I think
can.
is kind of interesting
I
with the
respect what
Christian
you
thing
do.
that Attorney Jones brought up, but jails. These are jails. These are just
No, no, no.
private jails, and
And
people are
private
going into them.
jails. And yeah, I have to push back because
And
private
so,
jails.
how is it that we
Because
can convict a
let me say
criminal
this to you.
and
Let me
say go
say
to jail, but then we're not able to take someone who's
let me
violated the law
let me
and then
say
turn
this.
them back home?
Let me say this to you. Let me say this. This show has my name on it. I'm extremely careful about what I say. Extremely careful. I do not hurl allegations at people unless I can back them up. Because not simply because I can be sued, but because I would not want to level an allegation at a person or an institution that is untrue. Unlike anybody here, I grew up with people who would tell outrageous lies. I would read them in print, I see them on television, on people I love, namely my father and then the rest of my family. I don't want to see that happen to anyone. I also know what happened to the Haitians in Miami in 1980 that my father had to go down and save. Because many of your brethren would stay, like Father Jean Just and others would stay in my home because they were not welcome in the United States. But they would seek refuge in my parents' home with us in our guest room. And I'm telling you, when I talked to Carrie Kennedy, who I had on my show, Robert Kennedy's sister, when I talked to Jonathan Jackson before he went to Congress, when they talked about the conditions under which these people are living, they are equivalent to that. And the human rights organizations have said the same. They have said that. And America should be better than that, but we're not.
And the second,
Our government should be behaving differently than that, but they are not. They don't treat Europeans this way. They treat people of color this way. And that's the reality. They treat your people, and they're my people because they're Black people and they're human beings, moreover. They have always pushed Haitians back into the water to be eaten by the crocodiles. And they would go grab light-skinned Cubans and bring them here. That's the
and,
reality.
and the other point I wanted to talk about, I think Attorney Jones also brought up due process. Now, what is the distinction of being in a non-detained setting versus a detained setting? They both have a right to a judge. They both have a right to a hearing. They both have a right to seek out any kind of relief. Now, they're getting that. Um, it's just on a quicker pace. Unfortunate process of what he has done to the DOJ was all the new judges that were coming in. He's essentially not allowed them to come in. And that has increased the backload. He's fired a lot of other immigration judges. In fact, in January 21st, the first thing he did was fire the chief immigration judge from the DOJ. So that's a bigger problem. How is it that you want to detain so many people, but then you're not allowing more judges to take up the robe in order to hear their cases? What happens is all of these private institutions then get more money because then they have a longer period of time in order to detain them. And so I think that part is wrong. Now, I believe Dr. Amar had mentioned something about habeas corpus, because that comes up a couple of times when it comes to detention. And the habeas corpus is really just a Latin term. Corpus, as most people know, it's your body. And habeas is you have a right. So that issue is really, do they have a right to the body? And the truth is, under immigration law, as you know, Sora Jackson, I also teach immigration law for Roosevelt University. And one of the things that I teach the students is how black and white the law can truly be and how much it's remained the same for the past 60 years. Although we might see policy enforcement change, the actual letter of the law hasn't changed that much. And so everyone who is present in the United States without authorization, technically, we have a right to their bodies. And so that's all is going on right now. So there is no position for American citizens to say that we're unlawfully detaining them. Obviously, it's lawful. As far as how do we identify them, most of them give us their address, where they live. We have their biometrics. We have their pictures. They give it all to us, us meaning the United States government. They give it to the United States. The same reason why Donald Trump cannot visit these other countries is because he's a convicted felon. That's why so many people and so many presidents and world leaders have met with him here in the United States. It's because he can't even leave the country to go into these other countries. So the same law that keeps Donald Trump, the president of the United States, from being able to enter their country is the same law that we use in order to keep people from coming into our country. It's very similar. It's unfortunate that so many people are not familiar with immigration law and its application. But if we want these things to change, we really do need a deep dive into what the letter is and have a reformation in that. For example, the asylum that people are being able to apply for in other countries. Of course, it can be done. People have applied for asylum at the U.S. Embassy multiple times, and then after it's been granted, then they fly over to the United States. What we're seeing here, though, is that a few people who were born in the United States are unfortunately being swept up in the maze. Some who have been naturalized, unfortunately, are being swept up in this craze. And those people definitely should not be in that. And that is absolutely wrong. The United States president does not have a right to strip someone of their naturalization or strip someone of their birthright and then return them to a foreign land. That he does not have. And the United States Supreme Court has already spoken on that, and it's been upheld. But it is important for us to know, is he going to follow what the check and balances has allowed him not to do, which is the court? And I think the court, unfortunately, we've got a situation where the courts are kind of scared, because if they don't start applying reason to their decisions, he might come for them. And all those Article 1 judges, what's going to happen to them then?
Well, what's going to happen to Anastasia? See, the thing is, my quarrel is not with the law. That is to say, and I'm not saying that we don't need to change them and do a deep dive. Of course we do. It's the spirit of this. That is what people are objecting to, how people are being treated. That is what is so, that is the abomination. I mean, when you imprison someone, you're not supposed to put them in squalor. I mean, we had people dying during COVID because they were in prisons that were not, they were in jails and prisons that were not clean. They were being served bad food. No one deserves that. That's cruel and unusual punishment. I'm no lawyer. I understand that. No one deserves to be treated inhumanely. And I think, to me, that is the real point. Should people just come here? And no, we do have rules. Absolutely. The fact is, most of the people who are coming here, the U.S. Embassy, that's not, of course, they're not coming in that way. That is a very elite approach, with all due respect. And that is not what's available to so many people. Most people are not going to get to an American embassy in their place. Most of these people are poor. And they're so far removed from they're so far they don't even know not know they're not even allowed near their own presidential palaces. You know, I mean, and so I'm hearing you, and we do need to do a deep dive on. We need to really understand what birthright citizenship is about. Yep, how we came about it, all of that. I think it's important for us to really go into the history of that. That is very important.
But before
I can't sit by. I mean, I'm coming to you because no. Because my thing is, I cannot sit by and watch people treated inhumanely. I mean, it is not only it's an affront to our humanity, and when we go overseas, and more than that, when our men and women in the military go overseas, they feel it.
I mean, it all comes down to what are we treating our citizens like when we put them in jail? Are we treating them equal to the citizens that are being deported? Or are we treating the deportees or the citizens worse? So
we're not treating any of them.
That's the bigger problem on human rights.
But with all due respect, it's before you get to putting them in jail. You know, how do you get to a point of arresting them? How do you get to a point of confronting them? You know, and this is before you're putting anybody in jail. And what we see happening, and perhaps all the reports are incorrect, but what we see happening across this country on the immigration front is this roundup of just going to where they think some Latinos may be, and then arresting them. That's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing. That's what's being reported. There is no justice there. You don't have to be. Look, the law in the United States applies to the land of the United States. Regardless of how you got here, there's certain rights you have once you're on the dirt of the United States, regardless of how you got here. There's certain rights that've got to be respected. And one of those rights that you're entitled to be respected is that you can't just go and approach somebody for no reason at all because they look like they're Latino. You can't do that. But that's what we see happening. And then we see a pipeline process that is then streamlining them. For the most part, a lot of them are forgotten about because you don't know where they're going. You don't know where they're detaining them. You don't know where they're initially taking them. There's none of that information that is initially there. And that happens time after time after time again. That's why the Kilmar Garcia case became so big. Because the question is, why are you approaching them? What are you doing? And why are you sending them overseas? And where was the hearing? All those questions start to lay up there.
But Mr. Garcia's case, he did have due process. He got approved for asylum. He definitely should not have been taken up, and he should not have been brought to that other country. What have we heard? Has he been returned? Has the news reported that he's been returned?
We had to.
I've got two attorneys on. I'm going to have to jump in to make a point today, if you don't mind. Okay. So one of the points that I want to make is that I understood what you were saying, Attorney Sinat, about habeas corpus and linking it just to the detention. But I think that you may be informing the Trump administration of something that they actually are not saying, because what they have said and what the attempts have not only been around immigration. They're framing it in terms of immigration at this moment, immigration and detention. But this is not even the first time that this has come up as something they would like to do. And so over and over, what we see from this administration is a chipping away at civil rights and civil liberties to start with something that appears almost within the realm of explanation, maybe a little unusual, but within the realm of explanation, and then to begin to expand it. And so that is what has been being discussed in terms of habeas corpus and removing due process rights. The reason that this was so inflammatory, at least on the left and some left-leaning programming and some centrist programming, within the past month has been threats to use the removal of due process from protesters, from people who are disagreeing with the administration. We had a student, a PhD candidate, ripped off of the streets, having had her visa, so she thought she was here legally, having had her visa um, removed without her having been informed, and she's ripped off the street by agents of the United States government and imprisoned in a different state. Where's the due process? Where's the habeas corpus? What then happens when we begin to see American citizens, or in the case of Abrego Garcia, we're seeing someone who there was an existing standing court order to not take this man specifically to the country where they've taken him. Where's the due process? Where is bringing him in front of a court of law and then saying, let's hash this out? What we have instead heard is this semi-quasi argument that there just isn't enough, that we have to change the rules due to some sort of scarcity that, I'm sorry, I'm just not buying it. If there are not enough lawyers in America, then create more lawyers, but don't take away the law that protects the people. And so to begin to say, well, if we had to offer due process, as we have been doing, if we had to offer due process to all of the migrants, then we would never be able to get through the courts. It would overwhelm the court system. This is fallacious. This is not an accurate argument. And then the danger of it, the encroaching danger that people are responding to viscerally, is what you now see in cities like LA. We have only had 4 occasions in the United States of America where there was a removal of habeas corpus. For instance, like a suspension of habeas corpus. Sorry, I'm not a lawyer. I just grew up as the stepdaughter of one. So a suspension of habeas corpus has only happened 4 times. It's happened under real insurrection, real military insurrection, under times of war, and often with congressional authorization and approval. What has not happened in the United States of America is we have never deployed our military against our own citizens. Today and yesterday, the Secretary of Defense and former weekend news anchor said that that's exactly what he would like to do with United States Marines. He wants to put United States Marines. The president is already saying that he's going to send the National Guard to California to, deal with our First Amendment rights. But the Secretary of Defense would like to go one step further. And since I'm not a lawyer, I will ask you all as lawyers, if my understanding that it is not legal or constitutional for the United States military to be turned against its own citizens is true. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But that's what they are now going for. So if we don't have habeas corpus, if we don't have the right to defend ourselves, if people can be picked up, whether or not we even know if they've committed a crime, Abrego Garcia was picked up despite his court order, and there actually turned out not to be true allegations, it appears. And so in a unique set of circumstances, he is now being accused. They've come up with the crime after the detention. That's a new one to me. And we are now going after protesters and considering using the U.S. military.
They do that to Black people all the time. You have a First Lady of the United States who came under here, who was given citizenship under questionable means. I'm not mad at her. She's politically connected. They were able to get her a Genius Grant. I thought that, but no. I mean, I'm not shading her, but I don't know. She didn't come in as a scientist. She did not come in as someone with a special talent that warranted that. Okay, and the thing is,
I'm not shading her. I'm snickering at the fact that we are pushing out literal scientific and artistic geniuses by suspending their visas and kicking them out of the country.
And what I'm looking at is, and you have artisans, you have
Mhm.
people who work in the fields.
Yes.
They to me are as important as these scientific geniuses, because
Yes.
without them we cannot live. Without them we cannot eat. These
Mhm.
people plant our
Mhm.
food. They pick our food.
Mhm.
We need them like you need the garbage worker. If you don't think a
Mhm.
garbage worker is necessary, let them go on strike. And we need to stop this. Now, my question is, because the law is supposed to be is not supposed to be subjective, Attorney Jones, Attorney Sanat, but it is clearly subjective.
Mhm.
And you know what? Any of us could be walking down the street and could get scooped up.
Mhm.
The running joke when I was in college, you know, Columbia Road in DC, Daryl Jones, which is a heavily Hispanic district. Now, mind you, my thing is more blacks were sent to Latin America, so-called Latin America, than were brought to the United States. So the big joke was every time we'd be walking down the street, they start speaking Spanish to me. I'm like, well, you know, hey, you guys, maybe it's because I wear my hair pulled back. I don't know. You know, more more black people were sent there than anywhere. It's like a running joke. I said, I don't know what it is, but it is what it is. My point is, any of us, if they ask you your name, Anastasia, you're gonna be suspect. If you're walking down the street, Anastasia, Daryl, or Dr. Amar, and they ask you your
Mhm.
name, you're suspect. It is very clear increasingly these people don't care about our rights.
Right.
And that is why we're coming to Chicago on June 12th, 13th, and 14th to have these kinds of debates. Yes, with Daryl Jones. Yes, with Anastasia Sanat. Yes, with Alia Amar, with other people. Because wherever we are, if you can be where Attorney Sanat is, or where Attorney Jones is, or where Dr. Amar is, we need to have these discussions. We need to hash them out. Because I think we can all agree that we have a real problem here. And enough people, if the Brennan Center, the ACLU, the NAACP has more than 70 lawsuits against our government right now. If all of these people and more can come together and say, hey, we got a problem, you all. Our rights are being taken from us. You better watch it. I don't want us to be, you know, it's like with the rabbit in the pot. I don't want the water to be boiling before you can't jump out.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, I think that's because that is where we are. And I mean, of course, we're looking at Los Angeles right now, which is very, very troubling. Because guess what? That will spread.
Mhm.
Because these people have had it. Something has happened in that community
Mhm.
that has pushed them over the edge. You are in it, you are in a city and a state that is absolutely unaffordable. People can't afford to live there, and yet they must work there.
Mhm.
Something has happened that has pushed these people over the edge. And we need to know what it is. There's something about these ICE detention centers that's untenable. Because did you know this past week they had an elementary school graduation? I saw a gentleman crying on TikTok, black man, and he was a worker in a school, and he was so upset that he had to walk away. He was crying and he was apologizing because he was just streaming himself. He said, "Y'all, this is awful. We heard these helicopters. We saw these police officers rushing. These kids were trying to graduate from grammar school. And these people came in, soldiers, essentially, grabbing parents and leaving their children there in the middle of the ceremony.
Mhm.
I mean, really?
Right.
Really?
The
Is that
cruelty is the point.
is it I mean, are we supposed to be doing it like that, y'all? Really?
So, Dr. Amar, the National Guard is created to protect the United States. And so we have an Illinois National Guard as well as every state has their own National Guard. So yes,
Mhm.
the National Guard can be used to protect citizens. number one. Two, when you're thinking about pulling in United States Marines, and have we ever been in a situation in which the United States president has called the military to do active war? Of course, there's a civil war. Now, have we had a civil war since then? No, of course not. But it has happened in the past. Number three, when it comes to understanding the law and applying the law, I think a lot of people just listen to the opinion pieces of many of the media and don't take the time to truly understand what the law is. Are people getting due process? Most are. Are people eligible for habeas corpus? Most are not, because most already know under the law they're rightfully where their bodies should be. Very few habeas corpus petitions happen in the Seventh Circuit, but when they do happen, the judge does look at whether or not whatever facility has the right to that body, or whatever agency has the right to that body. So there is due process within that as well. Now, when it comes to, and this is probably something that people are probably not going to feel me on, but if we're really upset on the application of the law, it really requires you to select congressmen that are going to change that law. There are so many different laws that are on our books right now that people are unaware of. And it behooves you to actually just read it, to understand it, because I think it's pretty simple when you read it. The problem is a lot of people don't take the time to read it. They let someone else read it, someone else interpret it, and someone else apply it. Right? And when you do all of those things, then everything is subjective, right? And so I agree with you, Story Jackson. Yes, law is subjective. Obviously, it's subjective, because prior to 1776, there was no law, there was no borders, there was none of those things. It wasn't until later that we started creating laws in order to keep people out from certain spaces and to let people in. It wasn't until much later that Black people got the ability to even vote. So when we're thinking about the law and how it's changed, we have big strides in some centuries, little strides in other centuries. 1900s was obviously big strides. 2025, we have very little strides. We have a situation in which people are not even taking the time to read how Elon Musk really never had a job as a special employee of the federal government. He just never worked for them. And why is the relationship breaking down? Because they're trying to hide something else. Why are they going to Twitter and publicly bashing each other? Because they're trying to hide something else. If there was good media out there like there used to be, where there was people investigating and things like that, we would find out what they're trying to hide and not just the surface of what they're doing. Because everybody knew that Donald Trump was part of the Epstein files. It's in.
But that's not. But wait. Let me.
So why would he say that?
Let me, no. My thing is, look. Let's be practical. People in power do all kinds of things.
Mhm.
The Epstein file's not even the point. We're never gonna know who's in there, because everybody's trying to hide it. Is they're not gonna let it out. Okay. What we're not talking about is the role that Palantir is playing in our world, in our society. Palantir, Peter Thiel, and Alex Karp, who is a Black billionaire most of us have never heard of, who is the head of Palantir. They have received all of these contracts. These people they have taken our data, and they're going to do only heaven knows what with it. I do know it won't be good, and I know it's to control us. That's what's happening. And that's a discussion that no one is having, and you're not going to have it in corporate media, because they don't want to have that discussion, right? They should, they don't. And so, look, what people do at Epstein, no one ever stopped him because he's in. And let's just stop. It's like, okay, they were going to release the JFK files. Everybody knows that this guy who couldn't shoot, who couldn't throw darts at a dartboard, did not shoot the president and kill him. No, he didn't do it. Everybody knows that. So the thing is, what we're not looking at is how J.D. Vance is very quiet. How did he get on the ticket? Peter Thiel put him on the ticket. He got muscles on, and he's a Palantir's guy. And guess who was an investor in Palantir? Elon Musk. So while they're having their personal fight, guess what? These people are going to hug it out, or they might even hate each other behind closed doors. But you know what? They are united against us.
Yes, they are.
So I don't even care about all that other stuff. I know that they've eliminated the penny, which means they are on their way to eliminating cash, which means you are dependent upon the wizard behind some curtain who can decide, who can give you a social credit score and decide that you don't have access to your money or you don't have any. You might have deposited or had a deposit for $1 in your account, and suddenly it's not there because you don't have access to it. You've got to ask your bank for permission to take out a certain amount of money. We need to be having that conversation. I mean, I don't understand Donald Trump's problem with immigrants because he married 2 of them. And his first wife wasn't a citizen when she had their children. I ain't mad at him, but those are the facts. I see the smirk, Dr. Amar, but it's true.
No, I wasn't smirking.
I'm having fun with you. I'm just
yeah.
Like,
my face is betraying me because I'm over here agreeing across the board. I think this is such a great conversation that we're having, such a great discussion, because the points are coming from different angles and different perspectives. And that's the way that we keep saying, like when you started the show today, you said people have got to get out of their corners of, I'm with this party or I'm with that party. We can have disagreements around some of the ways in which we interpret things. That is what makes us beautiful as a country. Having lived in a country where freedom of speech does not look like this, it's not actually free speech. I really appreciate dialogues like this. And I think that the people who are out in Los Angeles on the street, the people that you've seen marching, the pro-Palestinian protesters, the pro-civil rights protesters, the pro-women's rights protesters, the LGBTQ protesters, that these are all people who love the freedom of speech, the freedom of protest, the freedom of religion. These are not necessarily people who hate each other. We disagree with each other. And we don't really have to have tanks. And I disagree with any acts of violence. I'm against violence. But what I'm saying is that what we're doing on this panel is what people need to be doing. Like Attorney Sanat said, dive deep, read, study some stuff, look at it. Maybe you're getting it filtered. Most of us are not, doctored or extraordinarily well educated in every facet of what we're experiencing in our lives. But it doesn't mean that we can't have an intelligent debate. And so I'm loving it. And that's what came on my face.
Well, I mean, but that's why I curate the panel this way. I mean, I throw a lot of things out here, but we're not looking to have an echo chamber.
Mm-hmm.
I love Attorney Sanat's perspective.
Yeah.
I love Attorney Jones' perspective. I love your perspective, Dr. Amar. You've lived overseas for years. I've lived overseas for chunks of time.
Mm-hmm.
You get a chance to see America differently because you read. Germany has their own Time magazine.
Mm-hmm.
Japan, they have their own Time in Newsweek. So you get a chance to even see how they report their news or how they report on us. And I think all of that's very refreshing. Anastasia Sanat, with her background, brings something that is so important to the discussion. And I am grateful for it. And it is a discussion that we have to have, everybody. We need to have this discussion. That is why we need you to come to your own convention, because the convention is for you and it's with you. It's about you. Because we have got a 2026 election. A lot of people are frightened to death. But I tell you, fear is of a demonic force. It is not of God. There's nothing too hard for God. Nothing too hard for God. God can do anything but fail. All you need to do is your part. So we need you to come to 930 East 50th Street. On Thursday night, we're going to have a gospel concert. We're going to get things kicked off. We're going to talk with Reverend Dr. William Barber. Pastor Jamal Bryant's going to be in town. We're going to have a lot of people. Attorney Darrell Jones. The great thing about the push conventions is that after people have their panels, they're walking around amongst us and we can talk with them. It's not a I sit high, you look and looking low at you kind of convention. It is a conference. It was always PhDs and no Ds, as Reverend Jackson put it. We would be sitting and eating in the same room with John Johnson, George Johnson, and Quincy Jones, and Esther Thompson, who scrubbed toilets in the south suburbs, as she was our lead usher. And you did not get to the front of that auditorium unless you went through her all 5 feet, no inches of her. People united to serve humanity. I hope that you will be there. We're going to be going into the next hour of the Santita Jackson Show to extend this conversation because we're talking about our rights. We've been looking at Los Angeles. It is instructive, and it is a sign of the times. Thank you, Prince Rogers Nelson. It's a sign of the times. And, we're going to be 250 years old officially next year. Empires crumble after 250 years. And so this kind of where we are in the inflection point. And I must say, I will just give my sorrow just a little bit of a pushback. When we got here, 1776 didn't establish laws. It established our law. Indigenous people had laws when we got here. We just didn't respect them. They had land. We didn't respect their borders. And the people who are speaking Spanish now are really indigenous people. So look at God. Look at that. Read into that what you all will. But think about that, everybody. At some point, the Lord makes everything right. And we're here. So let's get this right. I literally have 30 seconds, everybody. When you see my hand go up, it means I got to go. So 30 seconds for you, Dr. Amar.
Have the conversation with your friends, with your family. We end this democracy in silence and complicity. And as thinking people, as hopeful people, as proud and strong, and one day free people. We have never been free, but one day free people. I want you to have the conversation with your family and your neighbors, and I want you to get out there and act on what you believe in a peaceful way.
In a peaceful way. Attorney Anastasia Sanat.
I want people to get out there and educate themselves on the different ways that people can get into the United States. It's not just asylum. There's other ways that people can come into the United States legally. There's business investment. There's employers that can hire people. There's so many different ways. And I think the biggest way employers, especially those farm workers, should definitely have been hired by the farms that they work on so that they wouldn't be in this type of situation. So please educate yourself on immigration, especially the laws, so that we know more and we can do that.
That's why I've sent out the 10th Partnership for Refugees, because they do have a program. That's why they're being brought here. And remember, during the Hurricane Katrina crisis, before I come to you, Attorney Jones, to close us out, the Department of Labor suspended their labor laws and rules to bring in people from South and Central America. They would not even let the people who are indigenous to, or people who are natives of that region, they would not let them stay. They moved 1.3 million people out of there, mostly Black, and sent them everywhere, got them out of there. They would not let them rebuild their homes. They brought in people from South and Central America to rebuild the Big Easy. Think about that, everybody. Think about it. Attorney Darrell Jones.
Thank you, Santita. And, I agree with what Dr. Amar, as well as Attorney Sanat, has been saying. One of the pieces I just wanted to really close out on is this, and I want particularly Americans of African descent to get it. Because when we talk about these immigration laws, what we're seeing enforced is one step away from what they're going to do on other Americans. If you see them disrespecting their right to gather, to try to go to work, meeting at a Home Depot, needing no reason, going up there and detaining them, it's one step away from what they're going to be doing to everyone else and trying to do to everyone else. So it's really important that we step to the rule of law and that we make them accountable, and we be certain that due process is followed. And certainly, and I'll close on this, certainly we know that we have a lot of Latino brothers and sisters that are going to court either as a defendant or a victim, and they're being detained by ICE on their way to court. There's a problem with that. There's a problem with that. And so, I close on that. It's important that we have elected officials that represent our interests, but it's more important that we be certain that the rule of law be adhered to by everyone, Santita.
Amen to that. And Paula is saying that you're such a sharp dresser. Are you an alpha?
I've been known to be. Yes, absolutely.
Is this the birthday for your fraternity?
So,
Correctional officer for the lockdown has acknowledged that you all are 119 years young. I said, wow. So I just had to acknowledge that. The great men of A5A. All right. From the ladies of Delta Sigma Theta, we send you all much love. Much, much love. In the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show, let's talk about how we fight to get our rights. We have got to fight. You have to fight to get them. You have to fight to keep them. The next hour of the Santita Jackson Show. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.